And welcome back to Lecture 3. I'm looking forward to charging ahead into this information, hopefully getting you prepared for your quiz, which is on Friday. So for Lecture 3, starting here, we're going to turn in your books to page 403. And I believe that in your notes, it is Roman numeral 3 as well, the U.S. at war. Today what we're going to cover is the United States preparing for war, not only militarily, but also financially and materially. So let's go ahead and look at our slide here. Just one slide today, looking at number 1, a draft was instituted. It states in your book that the standing army in the United States at the beginning of World War I was only 200,000 men. And so they realized we need more people. And so we go back to the Civil War and what we learned in that chapter. How do you get more men to join the army? Well, if they don't volunteer, the government can force them to. We call this a draft. And so a draft was instituted, and the government passed what was called, and it says in your book, the Selective Service Act. And so the Selective Service Act was set up so that they could draft the necessary amount of men and the right men to go to war. And so about 4 million men went into the service, and there were a number of camps, over 20 camps, I believe maybe even over 30, that were set up around the United States, training these men quickly. And you have to imagine, they did not have much time to be trained before being just thrust into World War I in Europe. So a lot of these men have been quickly trained, not to the extent that they probably need to be, and they've been thrust into combat. Now, we would also state that much like the Civil War, World War I became a total war for the United States. And we said that a total war is defined as one where every facet of life is geared toward the war. That means that factories are now like a factory for clothes. They're not just putting out the clothes that they want. They're making clothes for soldiers. Everything is geared towards war production. You have food companies, food factories that are putting together food that is to be sent overseas, not only to soldiers, but also allied countries who are needing food. Americans joined in this total war aspect by raising what we called victory gardens. And they called it victory gardens to try to inspire themselves and gear themselves up for war and to try to raise morale. And these victory gardens is where Americans would raise their own vegetables and then send it overseas, not even take part in it themselves. And so some Americans, though, not only would they send it overseas, some Americans would actually eat what they grew themselves so that more food that was in the stores could be sent overseas. So it worked both ways. And then you also have African Americans and women who began working in the factories while the majority of men went overseas to fight in the war. Now, how did we pay for this? In fact, the government signed, like it says in your book, they signed a bill that allowed for billions of dollars to be spent in this war. It says right here, $24 billion paying for the war. The Allies, talking about England, Russia, Italy, they borrowed $8 billion of that. And we think of billion today as chump change because President Trump, due to this coronavirus outbreak and the economic impact it's having, he signed hundreds of billions of dollars in a bill that's allowing it to go towards the economic efforts and trying to raise the market back up to where it needs to be. So you have $24 billion that's been allowed toward the war effort by the government. You also have people buying bonds, which is where they would pay the government money to buy a piece of paper called a bond. And then over time, interest would accrue on that bond. And the government would pay that person back plus a little extra with that interest later on. It actually used to be a popular birthday present. Not in my lifetime, but I've known a lot of people like my parents. They said, yeah, sometimes one of the gifts that we would get would be a bond where over time interest would accrue and they'd be able to get that bond, turn it back in, and get more money back. So you had Liberty bonds. You had the $24 billion that the government paid towards the war effort. And one other way that this became a total war, I forgot to mention, is not only were people gardening victory gardens so that they could eat that food and more food could be sent overseas. But you had people conserving certain types of food. If you remember the picture that I showed yesterday, it was a picture of a little American boy, and it was saying, "Save the wheat for the soldiers overseas." Well, it says here, if you look on page 404, it says people not only raised victory gardens, but they would have themed days of the week where they wouldn't eat a certain type of grain. You would have wheatless Mondays. You would have meatless Tuesdays where you wouldn't eat any meat. You would have porkless Thursdays where you wouldn't eat pork. So people had themed days where they wouldn't eat something so they could so that they would be able to conserve it for soldiers overseas. Well, that actually concludes the lecture. It's a short lecture today. You will have a quiz on Friday. A quiz on Friday. Okay, that is, let me check here on my calendar. The quiz on Friday would be March 20th. Okay, so your quiz will be on March 20th, and it will cover lectures 1 through 3. And I will post another announcement of that on Google Classroom, which I'm going to use some time here to go over with you just once more. So this right here, like I mentioned earlier, this is the stream page. This is what I'm going to post important announcements on. I'm going to try to send as little emails as possible because I know you and your parents are being flooded with tons of emails. So I will send emails if I feel like it's necessary. However, important announcements can also be found on the stream page. And so it also shows you the due date, and it will show up here in the classwork tab. You can see I have lectures 1, the reading assignment, lecture 2. And this lecture 3, will have already appeared by the time you look for it on Google Classroom. So everything should be up to date with Google Classroom. There is one more thing I have to do besides give credit for the sound effects to my daughter's toy. We have the poll. I asked you in lecture 1, what movie or show are you most excited to watch while under quarantine? And this could be a show that you just like to watch once and you're satisfied, but it's your favorite movie or show. It's a show that you would watch over and over again, or a movie that you would watch over and over again. And so I have tallied up all of the movies that you have sent to me. And if I didn't include yours, I'm sorry, it might have slipped my sight here. But this is what we have. We have 1 vote for Aladdin, the new one, to be more specific. Have not seen it yet, still a fan of the cartoon. You have The Mandalorian, fan of The Mandalorian. Acting is suspect, but it's a pretty good show. You have Frozen 2. This one actually had 2 votes for Frozen 2. I have to be honest, started watching it, couldn't make my way through the whole thing. I only like parts of it, like Olaf's song, and then what's the guy with the blonde hair's name? His 80s rendition of a song was pretty good, but after that I lost interest. My favorite, and this is a shout out to one of the students out there, Remember the Titans. That is an all-time favorite. Always cry in that movie. And you might ask me, did you cry whenever he got in the right? No, I cry when he scores the winning touchdown. We have a show. This one was a twofer. One person said they love Lost in Space, which is on Netflix, I believe, and Gilmore Girls. And they sent an email, you probably wouldn't like Gilmore Girls, but it's a decent show. Why do you think I wouldn't like it? Maybe I've watched all the seasons. Maybe I haven't, but maybe I have and enjoyed it. Let's see here. Shrek, classic. You have Princess and the Frog. Never seen it, but I'm interested in seeing it. Have Disney Plus. Might hit that one up. Someone cheated and said any Disney movie. That's not fair. 2 people said Toy Story. Interested in which one? Hopefully the original, which interestingly enough, I have a connection to Toy Story. I feel, and some of you might have heard me tell you this before, I feel like Toy Story was built for my exact age. Because whenever I was, I'm trying to remember how old I was when the first one came out. But anyway, whenever the first one came out, I was the same age as Andy. The year I graduated, Andy was graduating. I have a tight-knit bond with the Toy Story characters and with Andy. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That's a good one. And actually, little known fact about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It actually, the graphics are pretty slow and undefined, but then as he starts to gain his powers and becomes more evolved with his powers, the graphics start to define and become more acute and better graphics. Interesting side note, only know that because of my graphic design brother-in-law. Endgame, decent. Seen it once. It was pretty good. The Sandlot, classic. And The Sandlot 2. Someone else put that down. Pirates of the Caribbean or Caribbean. That will be an endless debate. We'll have to ask God when we get to heaven. And then Beauty and the Beast. Yes, big fan of that one. No one said Snow White. No one said Cinderella. Very surprised at that. There's a couple in here. If you haven't seen Old Yeller, you learn many life lessons by watching Old Yeller. If you're in the mood to cry, I would say watch Old Yeller. That's on Disney+. If you're not in the mood for that, I would not suggest watching it. But anyway, I think that is it. I will come up with a new poll question in Lecture 4. Thank you for all the responses, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Stay safe and healthy. Have a good rest of the day.